let me tell you a story you have already heard several times before.
Chewing gum and sucking dick got my jaw all fucked up.
It's already falling apart. Oh my. Metal Gear released in 1987 exclusively for the MSX. The game was directed by Hideo Kojima, a kid who thought that action movies were so cool he was willing to dedicate his entire life to them forever and do nothing else. Then he failed to get a job making movies because he was like 20 and decided to dedicate the rest of his life to making a perceived inferior form of art. After landing at Konami, he had to make games for Konami's home system, the MSX, which unfortunately for him was terrible. He couldn't have the fast-paced gunfights and bombastic explosions that he really wanted, so he had to settle for something more humble. A single-man infiltration mission where the entire appeal comes from the intensity of not getting into gunfights. And thus, stealth as a genre was born. Despite being adamant this was a one-time thing, some American shenanigans happened and he was brought in to make a sequel, which he decided to kind of make a remake in some sense. Metal Gear 2 was basically an improvement in every way, and then he stopped making Metal Gear for several years, where he instead made adventure games where you objectify women. That was until he saw the very first PlayStation said, "Awooga, humana humana." You're telling me this has 3 whole dimensions? Despite having the possibility to make blood-pumping action scenes, he took some inspiration from his past works and made it a more stealth-based game, although not without its intricacies. Metal Gear Solid 1 was simultaneously a sequel and remake to both of the MSX Metal Gear games. It directly steals many story beats and direct room layouts, but in a much more technologically impressive way. 3 dimensions, if you can remember, even if you can only play the game in 2. It was this design philosophy that made Metal Gear Solid 1 the ideal power fantasy for its target audience. Loser teenagers who felt incredibly insecure about their own identity and masculinity. The same kind of person who found MGS1's focus on individuality and a great man narrative very appealing. MGS1 was supposed to be the end of a simple story. Much like every other Metal Gear game ever made, it was designed as though it would be the last. Except for Peace Walker, which is why it sucks so much. I'm getting off topic.
As long as I stick with you, boss, I've got a good feeling none of that will happen.
Why are we still here?
The outside forces which pushed Kojima into making Metal Gear Solid 2 were so overwhelming, he ended up deciding to make Metal Gear Solid 2 about the creation of Metal Gear Solid 2 and the society which made its creation a necessity. Now we're getting to the part which most people already know. All of MGS2's trailers feature Snake prominently and as the central focus of the game's new themes and ideas. Its E3 announcement trailer, God Rest Its Soul, was incredibly unique for the time in that it didn't involve any fraud. I'm serious. All 10 minutes of gameplay in the E3 trailer are actual gameplay with some camera hacks applied. The twist is that the game's tanker chapter is only 10 minutes long. That's only slightly an exaggeration. At the end of it, Snake fakes his own death and you play the entire rest of the game as Raiden. Now, that's where most analyses of the game's tanker mission end, but I feel like it would be reductive to say this was done simply for shock value. For one, it's already clear in the tanker chapter that there is some rising tension, and something's obviously wrong. The entire goal of MGS1 is to disarm all nuclear bombs, which was already done a couple years before the story. Now the only people with nuclear capacity are the terrorists, which is why it's a one-man infiltration mission. You don't want them to actually use their nuclear payload. At the end of MGS1, the only existing Metal Gear is destroyed so that nuclear weapons can effectively never be launched again. MGS1 takes place in 2005. In 2007, Metal Gear's design documents have leaked and every nation on the world has the ability to end it. Snake failed nuclear disarmament and now he and Otacon have to fix it themselves, alone. Alone because Meryl is dead. Okay, not really. There are 2 endings to MGS1, Meryl's death being the only difference. Meryl's death only happens if you suck at button mashing, and the ending where you don't suck at button mashing is the one that gets carried over into MGS4. To be fair, it was confirmed that Meryl's ending was the canon one in MGS2 at the very end of the game, with kind of an Easter egg. There are several Easter eggs referencing Meryl throughout the tanker chapter, but none of them confirm that Meryl is alive. On the contrary, in fact, Otacon and Snake are heterosexual besties. That's not... How do I say that? Fellas, is it gay to raise a child and live with another man who you spent 9 years of your life developing a strong bond with, before eventually dying by turning yourselves into the state and being executed for high treason with one another? MGS2's prologue tanker chapter completely retcons the events of MGS1 to be where Solid Snake is a complete and total failure who was unable to protect the ones he loved, let alone the world. But you don't care. The actual story of Metal Gear being so convoluted has become such a big part of its identity that in Metal Gear Solid 2 alone, you end up spending 4 times as much time watching cutscenes than actually playing the game if you know where you're going. The amount of people who use Metal Gear's story as an actual jumping point for philosophical discussion rather than cheap action spectacle is much lower than I'd like it to be. Not to invoke the M word, but the recent influx of MGS5 posting is highly concerning. MGS2's story is more often viewed as a discussion about misinformation and censorship, And while I'm not going to disagree with that interpretation, it is at the very least reductive. A quick recap of MGS2's story. The Illuminati is real, and they have developed an AI called GW. The AI GW is mostly designed for the Selection of Societal Sanity program. The protagonist, Raiden, is the very first test subject for this system and destroys it. The main prediction the GW AI made that people act as prophetic is that content would be fed to people algorithmically rather than through curators, and that misinformation would be more of a concern than it already has been for as long as art has existed. The bait and switch served by the false marketing campaign highlights nothing but the player. Let's be honest, the Patriots didn't want you to play as Snake. The version of the tanker you play in the game is biased and inaccurate VR simulation of the actual events. The VR training the game is constantly harping on about, that makes Raiden so hated, isn't bad because it doesn't accurately prepare him for the events of the Big Shell. He is terrifyingly competent, seeing that he's just a simple tool. The crime that Raiden was subjected to wasn't having to read a bunch of boring tweets by machine learning. It was that his control and agency was taken away by the people he most trusted. Chiefly, the player. You. Let's take a look at the actual game instead of whatever stupid MP4 files are sandwiched between it. In MGS1, the two endings give different rewards. If you save Meryl, she gives you an infinite ammo bandana. If not, Otacon gives you an invisibility camo. These unlockables are still in MGS2, but they aren't given to you for just completing objectives. Instead, you have to collect dog tags. Almost every single patrolling soldier in the entire game has a dog tag, including the same soldiers on different difficulties. This doesn't include European Extreme because that was only on some versions of the game. I'll let you guess which one. Acquiring a soldier's dog tag is far harder than simply defeating the soldier. You have to hold them up from the front and keep your gun consistently pointed at either their head or their crotch for several consecutive seconds, when you can easily be spotted by other patrolling guards. If the guard is knocked out, you have to wake them up. If they're killed, you cannot get their dog tag until you play the game again on the same save file on the same difficulty, all the way through up until that point. What this is taking away a soldier's autonomy and control. Some of them are stoic and won't shake in fear of a gun being pointed at them, so you shoot them in one of their limbs, crippling them for the rest of the game. Dog tags represent autonomy as a pretty direct metaphor. They're given to you by your commanding officer, and seeing as the terrorists are a criminal organization, it seems strange that they would be taking these notes specifically from the military. They were probably given out by the AI to make this Solid Snake simulation run as smoothly as possible. Basically, the first thing you do in the game is put in your full name, date of birth, and blood type. All wildly personal things that are never brought up again until the final cutscene, when Raiden finds that his dog tags actually had the player's name on them the entire time, as we controlled him. Then, he throws them away. This is a very effective way to conclude his character because it seems as though he's never had control. The reason he was a perfect target for the S3 plan was his past as a child soldier that he refused to go to therapy for. It's only after he throws away his past of being controlled that Solid Snake tells him the whole point of the game with no subtlety whatsoever.
Life isn't just about passing on your genes. We can leave behind much more than just DNA. Through speech, music, literature, and movies, what we've seen, heard, felt, anger, joy, and sorrow. These are the things I will pass on. That's what I live for.
Now, it's important to say that, again, this game ends in abject failure. Sure, they destroyed the AI, but 9/11 still happened. The big Arsenal gear still crashed into New York and killed tons of innocent people. Olga is dead. Her child is still kidnapped and we don't know where she is. All of Dead Cell is dead except for the one who can't be killed and will continue to cause problems in the future. All Raiden has to do is keep on living. MGS2 was understandably not very popular when it came out because it denied the fandom the power fantasy that they felt they were entitled to. It was far more metatextual and philosophical than your average gamer's media literacy can support. Oh, I said the M word, I'm so sorry. MGS4 came after MGS2 because we don't talk about MGS3. Not because we have anything against it or anything, but it's just so uninteresting compared to every other Metal Gear game, and we're only kind of joking about that. It is so brilliant in the most boring way possible.
Hey Snake, have you ever seen My Mother Was a Teenage Spider Queen from Mars?
I can't say that I have.
Neither have I.
MGS4 forces you to play as Old Snake. You finally have the ability to crouch walk, but if you do it for too long, your mental condition will plummet because of how much your back hurts. The only solution is to either listen to your iPod or inject THC into your neck. Metal Gear is a weird series. MGS4 features the return of Raiden. In MGS2, you hate him because of how weak and effeminate he is, but now he's a cool cyborg ninja doing backflips while you're constantly reminded of how old and useless you are. He did forge his own path in the name of Solid Snake, and he's flexing it so hard. The message is clear. When will you stop trying to hide?
That's right, we've reached the part of the video where I legitimately defend gay furry sex as a storytelling tool.
Man, I'm feeling kind of bummed out after my most previous adventure. If only there was some way to take my mind off things. Heterosexual anime pornography. Alright, let's just boot this up. It's time for Plan B. Oh boy, would you look at this? Homosexual furry porn. Every furry watching this video is now mad. Also, I ran out of Nitro Pepsi halfway through Act 1, so we're going to switch to Plan B. This was a mistake. When I say MGS2 was fraud, I mean that the people who bought it were deceived. Through either $50 or piracy, they received a video game which was not that which was advertised to them. Echo, on the other hand, doesn't do this. The game is a horror visual novel that starts off as a dating sim before getting all kooky spooky. The game's description is as boring as it is formulaic. Chase is now forced into a situation in which he must help his friends either face or escape their demons. The 5 routes throughout the game are seemingly designed to give a unique perspective on each of the characters of Echo. Not just the romanceable ones, but unique side characters who aren't part of the main group. The town, on the other hand, is clearly the part of the game that we're supposed to fear while we help our friends. Social relationships are what's meant to break the trauma of the town. This is not what happens. While Echo is undeniably based off that one real town in Utah with a big lake, it more broadly fits into the entire American Southwest, constantly dropping subtle hints about the town's location in relation to other southwestern landmarks, such as the I-40, a road that passes through almost every town in the American South except for Utah. And they mention a nuclear bomb testing site, even though there's only one in the US, White Sands, New Mexico. And they also mention the Mormon Battalion Monument by name. Why am I bringing this up? Well, as I'm sure you've noticed before, this game is both gay and furry. I am not gay or a furry. I could give exhaustive explanations and anecdotes, but I don't feel like it because I don't care. I don't need to constantly perform hatred of others who aren't affecting my life in any way to feel secure in my own identity. It's really nice. You should try it sometime. As a game about the gay, it was already kind of a pretty hard sell for me. Even from the very first line, you can tell that it's a game about trauma, and I don't have any trauma relating to my urges. Wait, that's a lie. I live in America and was raised Mormon throughout most of my childhood. Now, Mormonism was never a big focus of the story. A lot of characters have tangential relationships to Mormonism, like Flynn's parents being devout, but that is left largely outside of the main text, which I suppose I should actually talk about. Plot recap time. Chase is setting up a kind of reunion in his hometown over spring break with his childhood friend group. Chase, the POV character, is going to college in the big city. Jenna is going with him, but is going to Harvard next year. TJ is the only character who is actually a healthy human being who exists in the world, being a lead athlete at his religious college. You can tell I'm not a furry because I called TJ a human being because that's just the language that I usually use to discuss art. Leo is working at his parents' mechanic shop. That can't be the right word. Flynn got a job at the county office from nepotism, and Carl is a stoner hikikomori. Wait, I need to turn down the terminally online lingo. The neurotypical word is neat. Everything is going fine until they all meet up at the lake and Flynn is furious they are able to talk about the lake so casually just around where their friend Sydney died by drowning in the lake 10 odd years ago. And this is when the game becomes furry and Ohana. He yells at everyone about their deepest insecurities and storms off, and here is where the routes diverge. There are only a few events that remain consistent across every route. On Wednesday, Carl has the worst birthday party ever, and on Friday, a mass hysteria event begins when the people in the town all suddenly start living like it's Grand Theft Auto. Although in TJ and Carl's routes, Chase isn't really present. So with all that preamble out of the way, why do I care? Well, it's supposed to be escapism. Leo's route probably exemplifies this the most. During the prologue before the splitting point, every character is given some moment to ground them as someone who you, the audience, are supposed to be attracted to. Leo is the most obvious example of this, being a thirst trap of cosmic proportions, being featured in most of the game's promotional material, and having already had a romantic relationship with Chase in the past that ended poorly. Leo is the most attractive character of this game's target audience, not me. So when you get around to actually playing his route, it's kind of,
As I stare at the fan, I notice something else next to it and gasp loudly. Is there a dildo? Is it something on those lines? What? Is that a fucking gun?
I will not elaborate on this further. Play the game yourself. Sorry for constantly harping on about this game's target audience, but it's really important to understand what the game does with its format in ways separate than other media that still hold similar themes or plot beats. Let's take the game's first and most infamous choice, lean on Carl or TJ. During the prologue, the gang goes to Six Flags, and while watching a show, Chase becomes tired and wants to nap on one of his friend's shoulders. The way this is framed for most furries is, do you want to lean on the plush, soft, fat guy, or the one whose actual job it is to be nothing but bones?
We're gonna lean on Carl.
Carl's more comfy looking.
Yeah.
TJ's a bony boy. And plus I think Carl's really chill. TJ's kind of uppity.
And taller. There's like a lot of logistical reasons why it's not a good idea just to lean on TJ.
Yeah, we'd probably crush him.
The choice is obvious from a sensory standpoint. Physical sense is a very important through line in furry media, or so I'm told by this cat's echo video. I do not watch enough furry media, and I am trying to rectify that slowly by watching BNA for the 6th time. Hold on. I forgot. Silly me. I forgot to put this here. Sorry, guys. Personally, I wasn't thinking about who to use as a pillow during this section. I've never used anyone as a pillow, ever, and haven't taken a nap since I was 10 years old. My biggest concern during the scene was the narrative. The only other VNs I'd played up to this point were games which had point system for determining outcomes with characters. Seeing this as the very first choice in the game, I thought there might be some hidden point system for which characters are romanceable, or there might be more screen time during the prologue. I was looking at things from a purely utilitarian perspective. I leaned on TJ because I thought TJ was the most interesting character and definitely the one I wanted the most screen time out of. That, and I was like 90% sure if I leaned on Carl, he would wake me up by yelling really loudly directly in my ear or dumping cold water on my head. Two things that are not in character for Carl to do, but certainly in character for the people in my actual real life who have the exact same vibe as Carl do. My relationship to TJ and effort to put his route first did not come from an attraction to the character, but rather an attraction to the narrative. What I'm trying to say is, he is my Ryan Gosling, and I'm not ashamed to say it. So, seeing as Echo takes place in probably New Mexico, and this is the official state jersey for the University of New Mexico, it's entirely possible that this is the actual reference image that was used for TJ's character design, or at least that's what I have to tell myself, because I spent way too much money on it when I found it at the thrift store. I can't say I've related to any other character harder in fiction. From his severe agreeableness, clear traumatic responses to even the most minor inquiries, inability to swear, not even aversion to it, wanting to but having your body fight not to let it happen because of a persistently overbearing religious upbringing, uncomfortability with even the most minor amount of nudity in the most reasonable circumstances, or even more minor things like having ancestors from the global north give him warm genes that make it so he can't go outside in more than 60-degree weather without feeling as though there are ants crawling under his skin. His solution is actually to just dump water on himself constantly. He packs like 20 water bottles. I love him so much. I want to kill Jenna. The thing I saw immediately in TJ was the depth that he didn't have. I was doing the thing that gay furries do to Leo, where I immediately projected onto him a bunch of character traits from my understanding of similar archetypes in other bits of media and close personal experience that I've gained from existing. Jenna doesn't see TJ as a fully functional adult human being and constantly chaperones and supervises his every activity, speaking for him in several situations and being just straight up rude to him several times throughout the narrative. She reminds me too much of real people from my real life, and I was trying to escape. But her characterization as controlling and self-righteous is only present in other routes. In TJ's route, Chase is overly controlling, manipulative, and a murderer. TJ's route, the whole thing, quick synopsis time. After comforting TJ after the confrontation at the lake, you agree to go on a hike with him, and then everything seems normal. He does something uncharacteristically cruel by provoking one of Chase's very specific triggers, before revealing that he only did it to hide away from the discomfort of saying no to Jenna, and otherwise things go well. TJ runs into one of his old friends from high school, Julian, who is exclusive to this route and also does not matter to the narrative whatsoever. He was just a Patreon back. TJ slips up and accidentally calls Chase cute, which is a word that has been in fact been co-opted by the gays, which begins Chase's obsession with TJ. One of the employees of the diner, who everyone recognizes, slightly pressures TJ to help him and he immediately buckles, getting Chase roped up into the adventure as well. This does not matter to the story beyond an excuse for the player, and also Chase, to lust after the shirtless TJ. Then, after Carl has the worst birthday party ever in TJ's route, he finds a note belonging to Sydney, telling the gang about his final, ominous scavenger hunt because he apparently really loves scavenger hunts. Now, returning to my complete unfamiliarity with the source material, it was at this point I assumed the game was going to become furry Anahona. It was almost gay furry Anahona, with some slightly differences in that these hallucinations were not fake. All the clues in the scavenger hunt are still intact despite outrageous circumstance, and all of them are strangely antagonistic to Chase. TJ also seems to know exactly where each of them are, going robotically pragmatic every time he says anything. Almost like he left the notes, and it's TJ's mass hysteria way of confessing to the murder. The scavenger hunt takes basically the rest of the week, and over the course of it, TJ gets less and less agency mercy and respect from Chase. And then, the night before the final clue is discovered, Chase decides he has to do something before his secret gets out. So, he digs it up himself at 1 AM, and replaces the final clue with his own sloppily made imitation to cover his tracks. Surprisingly, this doesn't end as horribly as you'd expect. Basically, everyone believes that Flynn was doing a stupid prank. Carl resists this idea, then TJ lightly shoves Carl in retaliation and accidentally breaks his leg. Later, at the motel, Flynn confronts Chase about it, and he refuses to say anything about Sydney or TJ, which leads to a fight. Then Julian and TJ go to Chuck E. Cheese where they are being friends, and Chase reacts incredibly poorly. It all comes to a head in the forest. Chase is working on his school project that also doesn't matter to the story when he tries to kiss TJ, which he reacts incredibly negatively to, clawing at him and running away to tell Julian what happened. TJ ends up crashing at Julian's house just to get away from Chase, and Chase doesn't react well. He goes back to the motel he's been sleeping in for the week and stays there. He hallucinates, he naps, has a mental breakdown in the bathroom. Leo comes to check on him the day he's supposed to leave, and he tiredly says he'll be fine even though he didn't get any work done on the project and needs to drive home all day. He has a dream in which he vividly remembers murdering Sydney. After another breakdown on the floor, the voices in his head tell him to go to Flynn, who is yet again confronting TJ about what happened to Sydney. When Chase arrives, he confesses to the murder by showing Flynn the original final note, a crude drawing of an otter holding a bear beneath the surface of the lake. Flynn then tries to kill Chase, before Chase gets the upper hand and drowns Flynn the same way he did Sydney. Recap over. Take a look at this choice map someone on Reddit made. It's blatantly unfinished because it doesn't include the one straight route, but it does still illustrate my point pretty well. There are two choices after the route starts. The first comes at the end/halfway point of the hike. TJ stands at the edge of a cliff, and you have the option to either grab him, do nothing, or shove him. My entire understanding of event choices from visual novels came entirely from Persona 5 up to this point, which features 3 options in every situation: nice, neutral, or mean. I was still playing Echo as though it were a visual novel, and I wasn't ready. I interpreted this as nice, neutral, mean. This was not the case. I wasn't ready for horror. I thought that shove him meant play a little prank that couldn't harm him. TJ being harmed was not in the cards yet, because I was waiting for the point of subtlety when the game just swapped. So I grabbed him, interpreting that to mean pulling him back from the ledge and telling him to be a little more careful. Then, that was mean, so I scrolled back and saw what might happen if I shoved him instead, if rewinding is still an option after all.
Lingering for days, white bone poked through skin, maggots feeding off the living.
What? The second choice comes far, far later in the route. When talking about getting into a fight, there's suddenly a choice without being prompted. Grab him by the neck. Throw him on the ground. Kick him if he tries to get back up. You may notice something about all of these choices. They are not choices. There is only one option in the entire route. In almost every other route, there is a bad end system, in which you pick the wrong option and die. Or in Carl's route, you pick the wrong option, have sex, and then die. But in TJ's route, you have to watch as the protagonist gets ripped away from you. It gets to a point where his understanding of events and the players are so far removed, it's genuinely horrifying. Oh,
we have to be Chase for another route? God damn it.
The horror in Echo is supposed to come from its outlandish circumstances, but only finds its way to the player when the player starts to desire a narrative that justifies those horrible events. TJ's route is one of 2 that don't have an explicitly happy ending. Both of the endings which are sad are ones where there is no option for bad or happy endings. And in both, Flynn dies because of his need for narrative satisfaction at Sydney's death. This suffering, this trauma, needs to mean something for these characters to get anything from their lives. But it doesn't. In every route other than TJ's, he is constantly pulled down by those surrounding him to the point where he is nothing but a husk of his true self. A true self which doesn't exist because it wasn't in the parameters of the narrative. And it's no mistake that TJ is also the only one of the main 5 who doesn't have a sex scene. In the story, sex often serves as a way of characterizing the people and showing their motivations in conflicting circumstances depending on who they're with. For a good example of this, see anything else made by these same writers. Okay, when I refer to TJ's true self in the editing bay, I'm trying to talk about his characterization, which doesn't really exist because the point is that he doesn't have a character, and that's what makes him such a sad thing. But while editing this video, I had to go to the Echo Wiki, where I found out that there are actually several side stories, which are pretty obfuscated. They're only behind like 2 secret menus. But when I read Lights, it was the closest I've got to crying in 4 years, which kind of reinforces my point, actually. All he and the player can do is watch as terrible events unfold around them. You can try and play every other route to see if anything good happens to him, as I did, but you're always running in circles. When will you stop trying to run?
I think like there's a certain point where you become, at some point, as you get more autistic, there's a point where like the tummy exceeds all other parts of the body in terms of like sexual appeal. I don't know why that is. Like every autistic trans girl I know would just absolutely destroy a man who weighs 300 pounds. It's a fact.
Do I like put up the Super Fancy Celeste box or like not do that? Because I mean, she says it's one of her favorite games, but like the community was kind of mean, and I mean, I wouldn't want to come off as an antagonist. Be forewarned that I am about to talk about music. Do not let me talk about music. My education is going to one of the worst schools in the worst state and one of the worst countries in the imperial core. Now that I have established that my opinion is worth absolutely nothing and no one should pay any attention to it, Patricia Taxon is the best musician ever. This really isn't helping my case that I'm not a furry, huh? She began her musical career when she was just 15 years old with the release of I'm Game. This album may be rough as a The freaking light isn't on. This album may be rough as a first release, but is promising and shows how she may grow in the future, is not what I'm going to say. Patty will forever have to deal with the fact that her first song is 6 minutes of a random sovereign citizen encounter with intermittent bursts of static.
You are conducting an illegal search of my person?
Still, though, she's been around for such a long time, going back to her older works is really entertaining. That, and it just makes me feel like an insane man. Her second album, Inhumane, is maybe noise album, or maybe just static. It's kind of hard to tell.
Do yourself a favor and stop.
On YouTube, it's age-restricted, seeing as it was uploaded one day after the artist turned 16, and is also just static. I can only assume Patty specifically changed it in YouTube Studio just so that it wouldn't show up in people's recommended feeds. I haven't had an urge to choreograph in basically 10 years, but listening to this fills my mind with a ballet/modern performance. The angst, the strife, and struggle it takes to be an artist, but the power of an art form being taken to its most basic points and definitions in order to unleash one's sense of inhumanity. Is this a joke? It's honestly more fun going through these to see what the comments are and finding a lot of really prominent people in them. Big Jewel, Tantacruel, and Elvoid, who would soon become the bane of Patty's existence by pivoting to entirely creating videos where they dub over Deltarune memes.
So far, you've survived 100% of your worst days. Great job! I'm so proud of you.
While I was editing the MGS2 part, I had to find more Raiden memes, and Elvoid also made the only good Metal Gear Rising memes when it popped off a couple years ago. So you should probably watch all of those, and also watch his Persona 5 video. It's the best one on the platform. I'm gonna take this down now. A lot of these albums are incredibly rushed and unique, constantly shifting genres and moods to seemingly be whatever Patty felt like at the time. This constant shifting did a few things. It let Patty understand all the tricks of the trade and how her software works. Thankfully, she stopped using iMovie pretty quickly. And it enabled her brand to be incredibly proficient at several different genres simultaneously. And not all of her projects are tiny and small in scope. For a lot of her more massive projects, she might release things that are just as long to stop from burning out. I will always laugh at the fact the album Before the Flowers of Robert Mapplethorpe, one of the most unique and gut-wrenching albums of all time, is immediately preceded by her cover of Bad Apple. Patty ended up releasing 10 albums in 2016, 9 albums in 2017, 11 in 2018, 12 in 2019, 11 in 2020, 7 in 21, and 6 in 22. Then in 2023, she went silent. Not really. She was still around, posting a lot of stuff on Tumblr, just not about her current projects, and when she did talk about it, she was more reserved than usual, speaking in broad strokes. Side note, do not follow Patricia Taxon on Tumblr. She has severe posting sickness, it could be contagious, and might even be terminal. I was going to leave it at that, but in the month it took to release this video, targeted harassment campaign was launched on Patty's Tumblr for some of her more controversial posts. I stand with Patty. Like, seriously, this is the most basic take. We've been talking about this for decades. The only slight hint we got was when the greatest mashup artist of all time, Jan Nisali, sorry 18-year-old Patty, but Yukai Young is objectively better than everything on Punk combined, started a number tournament to decide what the best number was. The first round was between 69, parentheses, Nice, and Belphegor's Prime. 69 lost immediately, so she leaked one of the songs on her so far unnamed project that was taking longer than any other thing she's ever created. Legitimately have no idea how you're all going to receive this next album critically. All I'll say now is that when it comes out, you'll think, oh, that's why she hasn't released anything for 8 months, but like, probably not in a positive way, just to be amused. Yeah, that makes sense way. This was until this fall, Tech Dog 1 through 4. It's exactly what it looks like. I was going one track per day for a while, but it eventually evolved into something else. I hate myself for not noticing something fishy was going on earlier. I was really excited for this collection of 4 albums, which is what it was definitely going to be. Wow. Thanks, Patty. I will now return to listening to Gog repeatedly until Tech Dog releases this fall. I won't charge patrons 4 times in 1 month for Tech Dog 1 through 4, don't worry. Tech Dog 1 is releasing in 15 minutes. Gonna release the others serially once per day. Thanks for sticking around during this hiatus. And then Tech Dog 1 came out during Spanish class, and I'm very happy my Spanish teacher didn't suplex me for wearing such bulky headphones. Act 1's description is remarkably simple. Feeling excitement. I mean, I can corroborate. That is one excited looking dog. I personally can't really talk about the musical makeup of this album or how it made me feel, but it is certainly the first part of a project. I really should have done any research into music theory before making this video, so I could say something like, all of the track names are random anagrams of Tech Dog, and a lot of songs have some minor callback to an older work. I assume I was only able to recognize the dog building off of Surely Nonetheless from the album Yes and. Do I sound insane? This album easily feels the most constrained, for lack of a better term. It's only 25 minutes long, and most of the songs are incredibly simple loops with vague changes in timbre. That's how you pronounce it, right? I don't want Tentacruel to make fun of it. It almost seems allergic to playing more than 2 sounds simultaneously, like some percussive synths can play at the same time as a chiptune melody, but it really does not want to let loose with its specifics. There aren't any lyrics, and the only human sounds are the really chopped up vocal samples in track 7 that are entirely unrecognizable. Then, later the same day, I get a notification from Tumblr. Patty is very wrong about the rules of pandemic, and I'm letting it be known in this YouTube video that her boyfriend is correct. The next day, in the same Spanish class, Tech Dog 2, Feeling Curiosity. This album slaps another Tech Dog onto Tech Dog 1 by making it so that all the titles are random anagrams of Tech Dog instead, although she added the length of one Tech Dog song to each of the tracks, so now the album is double in length of Act 1. The first song here is the only song of the 22 so far to have lyrics. Just 2. Back to me, back to habits. The characterization in Western society of curiosity as a specifically childlike emotion as prerequisite knowledge, with specifically this being shown as a kind of aversion, starts to form a picture of the vibe that Tech Dog is going for so far. Did that make any sense at all? Am I okay? The complexity is also rising by a bit. It's more common for disparate elements to act in closer harmony than as separate percussion melody. Again, I'm talking out of nothing. I do not know what these words mean. The same chopped up vocal sample is used in track 6, still entirely unrecognizable. Then, later that day, a heartbreaking notification. There is no H.H. Gregg samples in Tech Dog. Oh, what's even the point then? Act 3. Feeling at ease. Things seem to mellow out the further we go as emotions become more and more stretched out. This time there are 3 Tech Dogs, and the album is as long as 3 Tech Dog 1s. Cool. This one has a more ambient feel. It's not ambient, but it has that feel, says I, the one who has only listened to one ambient album in his entire life. Percussion takes a notable backseat, and a lot of overlapping melodies take center stage. Take this version of the sample. We get some of the original lyrics, and I'm assuming the original beat, but it isn't as punchy. It seems almost subdued. Listen to this. Listen to this. Listen to this. Or maybe I just need to plug in my subwoofer. Has Ralsei been in frame this entire time? This is where the leaked track is placed, and it goes so hard, you guys have no idea. This time there are more lyrics. Yippee! I don't know how to analyze actual melodies, so I'm just going to be analyzing most of the lyrics from here on out. The first track has a little vibrating tone that sounds like singing, but at a point where the words aren't fully formed. Nonetheless, they are still transcribed in the Bandcamp release. That's more ominous than previously anticipated. Probably doesn't mean anything. I just realized that I just said the same thing Ralsei does in chapter 2 of Deltarune, I'm sorry. In track 3, the protagonist of the album seems to be getting an interest in music, before we are again reminded this is something from the past.
Catch me on a good day. You can listen to me whistle the whole way home.
And on the penultimate track, we hear from the ominous tone again. Tech Dog 1 through 4 will not be 8 hours long, haha. Tech Dog 4. Again, the tracks have increased in length by 1 Tech Dog. Anything but the metric system. The art for this one is more artistic than the others. I can't... I sound British. It wouldn't even be out of place for me to say that if I was British. It depicts the artistic act of dance. The caption is, feeling like myself. Now, Act 4 made me do something that none of the other acts did, and that was pull my phone out in Spanish class to really test my teacher's patience and ask my brother a question. I had to know whether it was not Doppler or miniclip. It was not Doppler. Yippee! As said before, this is when the protagonist finally feels like themselves, and it's not as fun as previous. It isn't calm or even especially ominous, but there are a lot of more experimental noises. Track 3 is especially strange to listen to. I've probably heard that not Doppler bumper hundreds of times as a kid, but you can't go back to that now. Flash is dead. Not Doppler just ports their old games to mobile now. You can still visit the archive from the publisher side, but it doesn't work. You're only met with an empty screen. Track 3 takes the original soundbite and doesn't only use parts of the notes repeatedly, but treats them like their own separate instrument next to the other bleeps and bloops of various timbre. Timbre? Timbre. It's not timber. Then the lyrics are back. Wahoo! Oh no, they're sad this time.
To love sound again. To find that long lost nickel I spent. To love sound again. To tell all the dogs back home where I've been.
I'm gonna have to edit out like half of it of just the earworms being stuck in my head. These lyrics pretty harshly contrast the cheery, high-pitched tones in the background, creating a sense of foreboding. Right, I was gonna talk about track 6, and then I realized I should probably like look any of this up before just being an idiot in front of the internet, and it turns out it actually is a sample of that one song. It's on screen right now. Yeah, it's just a vocal sample. You know what they say about the young. This is followed by track 7, which begins every line with, "The kids are all right," creating a sense of hopefulness, which concludes in the penultimate track, which is the end of Tech Dog, right? Since I'm recording this after writing it, and I've listened to basically the entire thing again, and I want to point out that Tech Dog 3 had a little leitmotif for the penultimate track. Editor Me is probably going to replace this. Hey, me a month ago, you stupid moron idiot. That leitmotif is on every single act. There's one in every one. What are you talking about? I'm sorry, this track sounds like a Porter Robinson song, but if it was good. That's the penultimate track. Let's see what's in the finale. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'm so happy you all made it worthwhile. Compilation of all 4 will be up tomorrow. No one ever uses D in good faith. I knew she was up to something. You can never trust those eyes. Side note, this is the best comment on the platform. Tech Dog 5. Feeling fear. The colors are inverted. Rather than a clear boundary separating the joyous character from the joyous world she is surrounded by, there is only darkness and her luminous presence. Mostly her terrified eyes that are giving us a sense of place. What is she looking for, or hiding from? This album is dreadful. I could probably look up what a reverb is before confidently stating that that is one of the things that make it so terrifying, but I won't. I mean, that simply wouldn't be doing it justice. The album is, again, 1 Tech Dog longer than its predecessor, making it the longest so far. Again, there are 11 tracks that are each about the same length. Each 10-minute snippet of sound is some other form of vaguely threatening. Whether it be a wildly reverberating tone that swaps ears to create a sense of surrounding, or a constantly accelerating track inducing anxiety, it's miserable. You can look in the comments and see tons of people sharing their own experiences of like panic attacks and such. I have to specify that is /POS. This is all before the final track gets incredibly loud, warning of things to come before cutting to nothing for the last 30 seconds. When listening to the album chronologically, this 30 seconds of sounds is cut off by Tech Dog 6. Pain. Did you know that a computer was thrown into an active hurricane for the production of Tech Dog 6? It's excruciating. I feel like I'm supposed to talk about it more. I really feel like I'm supposed to talk about it more, but I don't have any knowledge or things to say. But then the ending of Act 6 is beautiful. Then it stops. Tech Dog 7, feeling nothing. The pain is slowly accustomed to and becomes the new normal, to the point where everything else fades away. Life feels like nothing more than a series of events for someone else's narrative. Another important thing about this album is how it breaks from the formula set by the other Tech Dogs. Instead of each track being generally the same length and 2 minutes longer than the same song in the previous act, each song is 2 minutes longer than the last one, which makes this the longest album by far at 4 hours, and also neatly splits up the rest of the Tech Dogs into 4-hour chunks. Tech Dog 7 is somewhat harder to listen to than Act 5 or 6, because while the others had some instrumentation and easy things to latch onto, Tech Dog 7 is just nothing. That's obviously reductive. I simply don't have the vocabulary necessary to explain what makes Tech Dog 7 such an interesting listen. You should have obviously listened to all this before, that's why the spoiler warning's there, but I can do my best to somewhat synopsize this 12-hour experience. Track 1 is slow, with mostly wind whistling to remind you that you're not on mute accidentally. Track 3 kind of picks things back up again. Then you reach track 6. I will not be discussing track 6. They've got a real Davey Reedon and Dakota vibe going on. Track 6 is entirely static, broken up by voicemails, which are, if you really want to hear him, listen to the album yourself. It's free. It's on YouTube. Track 9 really picks things up again. While track 5 did have a very short piano sample, which was immediately cut off, track 9 takes a full 10 minutes of the most gut-wrenching piano rendition I've ever heard. And then the penultimate track of the entire 12-hour experiment is the most beautiful thing. I really need to script this more. The intricate electronic bleeps and bloops have come back full force. The piano isn't around any longer because it was simply a bridge back to the true self hidden below that isn't charmed by basic human instrumentation. Instead, cheerfully exclaiming the simultaneous nature of being human and inhuman at the same time. The lyrics from that electronic tone at the beginning of Act 3 are reprised here, with an impassioned singing voice that immediately transitions into a sort of response. It's a one-way conversation held between the protagonists 10 hours apart.
You say I'll be happier if I lie and let you teach. But what's in it for me? What's in it for me? You say I'll be happier if I give you what you seek. But what's in it for me? What's in it for me? Well, it's been years now. I'm doing fine. Thanks for asking. I still live on.
And then, the first ever instance of the full vocal sample is finally returned.
Ain't that something? Drums came in, you ain't see that coming.
You are correct. I did not see that coming. Overly enunciated, lyrical miracle, white boy, Michigan-based rapper NF. Bandcamp user Bloody Book put it best when they said that this track is like releasing a pressure valve. Never-ending passion of an artist flowing out lyrically over the generative sampling, and then she starts singing along with the sample. It's so good.
Look at me, everybody, I'm smiling big. On a road right now that I can't predict. Somebody tone that down, but I can't resist. Y'all know that sound, better raise your fist. The belt's back, yeah.
It's so good. She's so good. I don't even understand. This is the second to last track. What do you think could the last track be? For 12 minutes, there is a sine wave. Then it gets gradually introduced to some whirring sound. Then around 20 minutes in, a darker synth plays, before some twinkle Violet Pony type sound effect takes it over, and the tinnitus finally starts to subside. It's not gone, but hidden under artistic expression, and it gets so loud. It gets so loud compared to anything else on the album. There's about to be another breakthrough. Water sloshing starts to play as though being baptized in reborn. Patty will finally be herself.
Stop. Try again.
I've redone this like 20 times. I hope it actually makes any sense. Death of the Author was a book about how using an artist to analyze the art's purpose is impossible. In modern times, it has morphed into analyzing the artistic intent of a work is meaningless, and it only matters what you get from it. With TechDog, that's kind of impossible because, yeah, I'll try to be as tasteful as possible here. Avery was born in 2000 and was diagnosed very early in life as severely autistic, and went to school in special ed where it sounds like the teachers were either ambivalent to making sure she had accommodations or comically abusive, both verbally and physically. She has described this era of her life as teachers using dog training tactics on her, which wasn't helped by her family at home being entirely unaware of her condition and treating her as though she was being consciously malicious, creating a great mismatch between her knowledge of herself and her knowledge of how the world perceived her. This mismatch led to her feeling simultaneously human and inhuman because of the way people treated her, and when she discovered the furry community as a bitter 4chaner who was just hitting puberty, she developed a strong theory and identity. She's a dog, through and through. My interpretation of TechDog 1 through 7 comes from this lens of growing up because of the way the album is structured around the main twist. The way time grows longer and longer, accompanying greater complexity during the first third, clearly reflects the way that she developed language. Not only verbal language, but the language of artistic expression in music. The vibrating tone in Act 3, talking about how it's being teached, reflects the beginning of consciousness around the abusive nature of the special ed class. Act 4 brings up the album to incredibly dense expression of beauty as she finally becomes comfortable in herself, but with an ominous twinge that reflects the massive tone shift. Patty was almost 24 when she released TechDog, and splitting the album into 3 4-hour parts could be the same as splitting her life into 3 8-year chunks, gaining consciousness before realizing that the people in your life don't respect you and growing horrified of everyone and everything around you. And then your fears are confirmed, being trapped in a depressive spiral of pain until you just stop feeling anything at all. Track 6. Then you finally break free from artistic expression, being reborn and finally proud, until that is again swiftly met with punishment. This is weird, right? It's uncomfortable to dissect a real dog's life as though they were simply there for their artistic project. Why am I so invested in this? I feel like a stalker. I can tell you what the album means, but that means nothing if I can't tell you what it means to me. I am the same age as Patty was when she first started uploading her albums. I was able to upload consistently until I reached the same age she was with her first album, and as soon as I had something to compare myself against, perfectionism hit me like a truck. Because I have to be better. Right? Y'all remember the old saying, when you have good taste and start creating, you vomit up every dish you make, at least in the early years? That's not a saying. What am I talking about? I'm the same age as Patty was at this point in TechDog, and I'm scared of the narrative itself I need to construct. I'm the same age as TJ was in the side story Lights. I'm terrified of the narrative that I need to construct around the people in my life who don't care to see the real me and have different interpretations of my own actions and beliefs. What happens when the people around me stop having full control over me? Where is the narrative going to lead that isn't what I'm planning for my future? There's a chance that Patricia Taxon is watching this video right now. If she is, I forgot to mention funny games.